Welcome to the Next Chapter Retirement Podcast, where we discuss smart strategies for building and protecting wealth, health, and well being, helping retirees shape their next chapter into their best chapter. I'm your host, Mark Erickson, and each week we help you navigate the big decisions that shape your future, from health and financial planning to Medicare and lifestyle design and everything in between. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by John Martin with New York Life. John brings a unique perspective to long-term care planning, not just from a financial standpoint, but also from a human side of what families go through when care is needed. We're going to talk about how long-term care really works, some common misperceptions or conceptions, and some newer strategies that can help you grow your assets while still giving you some flexibility in case you never actually need the long-term care. John, I'm really glad to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm really honored to be here as well and talk about this very, very important topic.
Awesome. Well, John, for someone who's never really looked into it, could you just share kind of big picture, what is long-term care? And when does it typically come into play?
Well, that's an excellent question. And this particular coverage has a lot of myths behind it, a lot of misconceptions. So firstly, long-term care is, by definition, your inability to perform two activities of daily living for 90 days. And the scenario that we usually kind of get people to be able to see that is you wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, you get up, you sit up out of the bed, you put your feet on the floor, and you start walking to the bathroom, and you begin to brush your teeth. Like that particular thing that we do every day as a natural course of us just being human is incorporated in at least all of the five activities of daily living. So that's bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, and going to the bathroom. Those things are the activities of daily living. And if you're not able to do two of those without assistance for 90 days, that is what we call a long-term care event. So long-term care basically is a very vital part of everyone's kind of existence. It's just one of those things that people don't really think about until you kind of need it. So to answer your second question about when is it actually needed, it could be actually taking advantage of at any point in your life. It doesn't have to be connected to age. It could also be, from an accident, a lot of things. I know we'll get down there a little bit more, but that pretty much sums it up. Your inability to do two activities a day of living for 90 days is what that is.
Perfect. Thank you, John. And in your experience, what is it that people most commonly misunderstand about the likelihood of needing long-term care?
That's a fantastic question. There's a statistic that basically says about 70% of people over the age of 65 are going to have a long-term care event. Okay, so the misconception is that people are not going to necessarily need it until I get older, or obviously the chances of you getting older and needing it are there, but long-term care is definitely something that you will need more so than often people realize.
Yeah, and I know, John, when I'm talking with clients sometimes about Medicare, I always remind them that the reality is, as we get older, our health tends to not improve. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I also like to remind people of is that Medicare is not long-term care insurance. It has very important limitations. And so very, very important for people to consider, what Medicare covers, what it doesn't cover, and why long-term care insurance is so important. John, what have you seen happen to people, financially in terms of families that maybe have a long-term care event and didn't have a plan in place? Do you have any experience there?
Absolutely, Mark. And I'm glad you asked that question. I have a personal story. So I've been in the business for about 15 years now. And one of the reasons why I got into this business was because my family was one of those families that didn't have long-term care in place. So just a little backstory. My mother was a nurse for about almost 30 years, type of person to care for everyone else, care for the family, but didn't really know what she had access to through her employer. So, one day, unfortunately, she had a stroke. And that stroke basically put her in a situation where she had to have care for the better part of the rest of her life. Now, what that did to our family, though, was that really put a strain on us financially. She was the primary breadwinner for the home. The situation where she had different savings and different assets, but eventually had to liquidate all of that because she did not have certain things in place. And one of those things was long-term care. So at the time, I was working at a hospital doing, physical therapy, because that's kind of what I was doing before I got into the insurance space. And, just watching the people come in that had long-term care coverage, they're able to afford those types of things. Just watching how it devastated my own personal family's situation is kind of what drew me into the business at that point there, to really help people to understand what's available to them. So ultimately, Mark, they don't go through what we went through as a family. So I don't think it gets any more personal than that, but we've lived through it as a family, going through that with my own mother.
Thank you for sharing that, John. And that's something, I think a lot of people do just tend to think of very elderly people needing long-term care, but that just simply is not the case. And when should people start thinking about long-term care insurance?
I think people should start thinking about long-term care insurance as soon as possible. And this is what we often see. Oftentimes people think that, okay, once I'm approaching retirement, this is going to be something that I, should put on that pre-retirement list. And that's true. But what we often see is once people start getting into late 60s, 70s, that's when it really gets very, very difficult to qualify for a lot of plans, because by that time, unless you're like a superhero, a lot of times we have things going on, right? We have some certain things. So because long-term care is the way it works, it's a long-term promise from these companies that they're going to be able to help to take care of you. The sooner you get into thinking about those things, the better. And like I said, Mark, also with the definition of long-term care, like it's your inability to do 2 activities of daily living. That has nothing to do with age. So you could have an accident, so it's different, it's various things. And that's why I was saying before, there's a lot of misconceptions about what long-term care is and, who should get it and when should I get it. So to answer your question, the earlier, the better. And we have clients, and I have clients who actually start thinking about that conversation in their 30s. We have people with chronic illnesses, things like that are going on. So we always advise people, as soon as you're thinking about the conversation, just have it.
Yeah, and I would think that there's definitely going to be an advantage for a financial advantage as well as an underwriting advantage for people to start thinking about long-term care while they're younger and healthier, rather
Absolutely.
than older and sicker, when it's going to be probably more difficult and certainly more costly.
Absolutely. I certainly agree.
So, John, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen some real changes in the long-term care insurance market over the last couple decades. And a lot of those were brought on, frankly, by the explosion in Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, really impacted a lot of companies. A lot of insurance companies actually exited the long-term care insurance market. Your company, New York Life, certainly really caught my eye. I'm very familiar with New York Life, very high quality company. And John, you're a very high quality individual, which is, the reason why you're on the show with us today. But could you share a little bit about how New York Life, and I'm not trying to get you to give a commercial here, but how the company has been somewhat innovative in terms of adapting to the changing world that we live in? And I think your company has a couple of different options for long-term care. If you don't mind, just giving kind of a high-level overview of some different options that people might have access for that could make sense potentially in different situations or parts of their life.
Absolutely, Mark. And you're right. The landscape has changed quite a bit to adapt to just longevity across the board. And then you have, the aspects, like you said, of Alzheimer's, dementia, these memory care scenarios where you really have to be prudent about the company that you go with and the options that you have. One of the things that I think why in New York Life is such a fantastic company in this space is, number one, most people don't realize that AARP is one of the largest senior organizations in the country, in the world, if that. And they have a relationship with New York Life. Like, New York Life is the exclusive provider of long-term care options and solutions for the AARP program, as well as some life insurance options there. So just speaks to how the policies and how the product has been drawn up really gives a level of security. It really gives a level of confidence. Also, it's a conservative nature to the policy that most people like, because, once you start getting older, once you start, thinking about aging and fixed incomes and just you don't want that many variables as you get older. There's certain chances that you don't want to take. So as far as New York Life, besides it's being AAA rated across the board, one of the top largest mutual companies, and not to toot all of that, but as far as the long-term care space, there are a few options that kind of address all of the scenarios that a long-term care situation someone can find himself in. Primarily, one of the things that New York Life has done to kind of expand that portfolio is basically offering two primary, let's say, chassis that a long-term care plan can be put on. The first one is traditional. Most people know it's kind of like health insurance. You have a pool of money, pays you a daily benefit. You pay that'll provide you a certain amount of long-term care allotted funds, and those funds would go towards your care. Very straightforward. There are discounts for couples applying together, various things that would make that plan compatible for people who fit that particular scenario. And then the other platform chassis would be more so on a life insurance platform to give people who may have some assets in other places. They're not being, they can kind of, the assets are not really being used, or they're sitting around and you can take it from your right pocket and put it in your left pocket. This chassis pretty much provides a death benefit, provides the option to get your return of premium, flexible payments, that whole thing, and be able to put a sunset on the plan so I can, set it and forget it. I paid the premium, I have a plan in place, and if something happened to me in the meantime, I have a death benefit. So that's just giving you a high level kind of view on the options. But what we found in our experience is either one of those options tends to work for someone as long as they can kind of get through that underwriting process and that kind of thing. But New York Life is a very, very strong company in that space, priced, very competitively. And yeah, so.
Fantastic. Yeah. I guess I've always thought of the traditional long-term care insurance as being a little bit like term life insurance, where if you need it, as long as you have it, it's there for you. Whereas the other one, where you talked about more on the life insurance chassis, I find that very intriguing, because the old saying is, plan for the worst, but hope for the best. So in that scenario, it seems like there's some good options for you, if you need the long-term care policy, but also some great options for you financially if you don't. which I would think that would have some tremendous appeal to people to protect themselves financially under either one of those inevitable situations. One or the other is going to happen. You're either going to need it or you're not going to need it. So it provides some certainty in that regard, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, and you said something key, Mark. One size doesn't fit all, but everybody's situation is different. And I think just being sensitive to everyone's needs, sensitive to what is important. And matter of fact, I had a conversation earlier today with a client that was interested in long-term care, and the situation, with that client was, married, kids are still close. That plan is going to be very different than someone who is unmarried, who does not have, children that are close. So it really does depend. And when we have a conversation with someone about, long-term care, we really try to understand, well, what is your scenario? What is the average cost in your area compared to, is relocation? So we try to look at the person's particular situation. And then from that lens, a plan is put together. And to your point, one of the two options or a combination of both tends to answer that particular situation.
Yeah, and John, I know in conversations that I've had with clients over the years, nobody really up in a nursing home, and I think in the age that we live in, people want to stay at home just as long as they possibly can. Can you share with us a little bit more about how long-term care might still be a great option for somebody who really, maybe their primary goal is to stay at home as long as they possibly can as they age?
That's an excellent question, and something that definitely comes up all the time. And it's one of my questions that, under best case scenario, if in a perfect world, something was to happen to you, you had a long-term care event, where would you like to be? And a good percentage of 90% of people say, I'd want to be at home. And it makes sense. You want to be in your familiar surroundings. You want to be, close to family, close to your loved ones. And, that does require a level of some modifications to the home and those types of things. But the beautiful thing is a lot of long-term care plans, people exercise those benefits from home. And that's definitely one of those features that is really important to people. Obviously, you can't control the degree or what type of long-term care event you have, but having some sense of control of where you can be, even if it's for a short while, staying at home is definitely something that people often say that's what they want to do. So, yeah.
Awesome. And I noticed when I was reading up a little bit about you personally, John, that you're involved in some grief-sensitive initiatives, which I thought that was just really just cool. And you're just such a kind person. That doesn't surprise me at all. Could you share how that training, how that perspective maybe has kind of shaped the way that you think about long-term care planning?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. So as far my background is, I grew up in church. Just let's say, so I grew up in church and grew up in a very devout community, very community oriented. As I forestated before, my mother was a nurse, so she was like a community type of person. That's how I grew up. So there's always this sense of empathy and care the way I view people, right? So when we're having conversations with clients, it's always trying to really understand what matters to them the most at the end of the day, right? Because the way we run our practice is very empathetic as far as trying to understand, put yourself in that person's shoes, be a resource to them for what they're looking for. So as far as the grief sensitivity, that particular program is my particular involvement in the school systems. So this is kind of helping young people who've lost a parent and that kind of thing, and how with our experience, I do have a chaplaincy experience too. So having that experience there to kind of come alongside people and provide that presence, provide that reassurance and that comfort or whatever they need at that point is that's in my DNA, to be honest with you, Mark. So that's kind of and I love to partner with people and work with people who share that. And as I said before we even hopped on, there's the same warmth, same comfort, same safety that I know many of your clients have expressed to me about you. So there's this, and I think that's important when you think about long-term care. This is one of those things where it is so misunderstood. And what I found is the more we have conversations about it with people, the more that light bulb goes off, the more they realize, hey, listen, I'm not going to be scared of, oh, this may cost too much. And I ask people, well, are you talking about cost? Or are you talking about price? Like, how much is this going to cost your family? How much is this going to cost your retirement plan? Like, what is this going to look like if we don't consider this particular option? And I usually leverage my personal story as well. Like, I know what it is to not have it. And having something in this space is definitely better than having nothing. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, Mark. But it's really it's like in my makeup as far as trying to be as empathetic as possible to people.
Well, I absolutely love that, John. And this is something where I think I think it's just something where more people have to have this conversation, because it's nothing to be afraid of. And in fact, the better informed that people are, and the better they understand the options, the better the position they're going to be in. So again, I don't think it's ever too early, and often not too late to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
About long-term care. And anyways, and you're a great person to get honest answers about what their options are for their given situation. John, most people don't realize that their biggest financial risk in retirement isn't the market. It really is, what if they need care in the coming few years? What are some of the bigger mistakes that you've seen people make when it comes to long-term care?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. And this is something that I often say, and our team often says this, that one of the biggest destroyers of people's retirement plans are health issues, things that you cannot control, things that you do not predict. Okay. And oftentimes, like you said, when we're thinking about retirement planning, we're thinking about, how much do I need to save? That goal number that I need to reach. And then once you get into retirement, it's okay, dealing with decumulation risk and those types of things as well. And what withdrawal strategy should I use? And what are my legacy goals? And, how do I sustain my income from, to keep it to a level where I'm not going to overspend and outlive what I've saved? But one of those aspects of it is really bringing the impact of having a long-term care plan in place to make sure that protects that strategy that you work so hard to build while you are in retirement. So a lot of times what we see is having worked both sides, helping people build the plan out, but then also not really addressing the long-term care aspect of it. We have some stories where, unfortunately, there are some people who maybe they waited too long, and now they're thinking about a long-term care strategy when they're in retirement, and now they have underwriting issues, things like that, where qualifying for a plan makes it difficult, and now you have to utilize those funds that you set aside for something else to now take care of a healthcare need. So as we often say, long-term care as part of your retirement strategy is absolutely paramount to consider, to make sure that, when you're living and, going on the cruises and living your life, that you have that assurance that everything's going to be all right if something happens to me. And that if becomes more and more probable as far as you getting older of having a long-term care event. Because like we said, about 70% of people over age 65, that's a high percentage. So that also equates to the importance of having that as a part of your retirement strategy.
Yeah, and John, you used a really great word when you that word legacy. What do we want our legacy to be? If you have children, do we want our children to become our caregivers. I love the idea that with some of the newer innovative long-term care products, that if we're blessed to live out the remainder of our years and really not need that much of the long-term care assets, that money, that pool of money, is still available to leave on to your children, also furthering that legacy. So I see it, protecting your kids from necessarily having to become, your caregiver, as well as, if we're lucky and we don't need a lot of the long-term care benefit, that we could pass on this financial windfall, to our children or loved ones, as part of that pool of money, if it's not needed for long-term care. That's pretty cool. That's Absolutely. The type of legacy that I would like to leave for my family, a positive legacy.
Absolutely. And to your point, Mark, that there are various options that, and we mentioned it too, with how a lot of these companies have become more aware of what's important in the market and what's important to people. And as we're living longer, it's not just you that you're considering, it's your loved ones, and what benefits, besides taking care of you, can this provide? So yes, absolutely. To your point, there are ways to leave a legacy. There are ways to strategize as far as include how those premiums can be allocated in your retirement portfolio. Various different ways that we can do it. So it's not just about the person that's insured. It's also about the loved ones.
So John, for somebody who's listening today who, they're kind of curious about it, they haven't addressed it yet, what's a simple first step that they could take to start the conversation, to get some information so that they know what the options are?
Sure. So like many people, they don't really know where to start. They don't have any idea, or they have some misconceptions about what it is. I would say just start having the conversation. I mean, they can reach out to you directly. They can reach out to myself and our team, an email, a phone call, that kind of thing. And I often tell people, a Google search will do it. These days an AI chat search would do it, but having a conversation and trying to understand what long-term care really is a great starting point. There are many people who kind of, reach out to us who have kind of done some preliminary research on their end as far as, what is it? What does Medicare cover? What doesn't it? And you did mention that as well, because there's a lot of misconceptions about that. But the best way to kind of break down those misnomers is having a conversation, right? Having a conversation with a professional or someone who kind of knows, after you've done your research and kind of, put your toe in the water, help someone to talk through those options with you that can make recommendations based on your own personal situation. I mean, I think that's really, really important. Not getting stuck in Google, like having that kind of get you going, but have that next step and have that conversation with someone who's been trained and kind of understands how this space works.
Well, that is fantastic. And John, if you could leave our listeners with just one mindset shift around long-term care planning, what might that be?
That's an excellent question. And I think for me, Mark, if I would say something, I would say having something is better than nothing. Having something something that addresses your need for long-term care, because the percentage is so high. The percentage of the probability of any of us having some kind of long-term care event, regardless of age, it really, really, really can change the course of your planning. It can change the course of your life in that, right? So I would say something is better than nothing. And I think oftentimes people may be afraid to have the conversation because of preconceived ideas of I can't afford it or I'm not going to be able to. You'd be surprised. A lot of people qualify for it and they're surprised that they qualify for it. It's the younger you do it, the better. But if you're, in your 70s enjoying retirement, you have the conversation. Something is better than nothing. And it's not just about you. It's about your loved ones. It's about, a legacy, and there's all these other things that are tied to it.
Love it. Love it. And John, before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know where they can find you and learn more about long-term care?
Absolutely. So yes, you can find me. It's funny, Mark, I'm just finishing up our website. That's currently being, it was under construction for reformatting there. But you can reach me via email. You can reach me at john@storehousecap.com. As far as New York Life, my New York Life email is quite long, but I figured I'd give you that one because they'll pretty much go to the same place. So john@storehousecap.com. You'll also be able to find me on LinkedIn and connect that way. The website is going to be called storehousecap.com. And yeah, those are probably the best ways that you can contact me. Besides reaching out to Mark, I would be happy to have a conversation with you, learn a little bit more about your situation and see if we can help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if any listeners are welcome to contact me, and I'm happy to connect you with John as well. And John, thank you for your time today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Next Chapter Retirement Podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like and subscribe and share it with anybody you know who might be planning their next chapter. We'll be back soon with more conversations to make your next chapter in life the best chapter. And for help navigating Medicare, you can find helpful resources and connect with our team at nextchapterpod.com. And until next time, plan wisely and live fully. Thank you.